May it please Your Royal Highness, it is an honor to welcome you all to the first International Conference on Equitable Education, All for Education. 30 years after the first Education for All meeting in Jom Tien, Thailand, I feel extremely encouraged that we remain committed to advancing this initiative, of which unites us once again at this conference to share practices and knowledges. Today, Thailand Equitable Education Fund, in collaboration with Ministry of Education, Ministry of Interior, Ministry of Social Development and Human Security, UNESCO, UNICEF, and Save the Children, organized this special 2 days event to promote equity-based basic education for underserved children. Due to the COVID-19 pandemic, the conference is uniquely designed to be a hybrid event where the opening ceremony is on site and the rest of the sessions will be conducted online. We are pleased to have here with us live high officials from ASEAN countries via Zoom. In this big screen, in this room, we have participation of high officials from Brunei Darussalam, Cambodia, Indonesia, Laos, Myanmar, the Philippines, and Singapore. We also, as of this morning, have over 2,100 participants from 72 countries registered to join the conference online. Thailand's Equity Education Fund, which is co-host of this event, was set up 2 years ago to address the hurdles of access to quality education for disadvantaged children and youth living in Thailand. Being young and small in size, we are hopeful that we can be part of the jigsaw in improving Thai education. The EF's strategy is to act as a catalyst through research and innovation, new approaches, and engagement with our players in the value chain of education. This means our players from grassroots, communities, policymakers, and key national and international players must join hands in improving education for our children, especially for the poor and the disadvantaged ones. As we know, the range of issues of equitable education are broad and complex, yet the problems of learning and teaching quality, school resources, poverty, malnutrition, domestic violence, and school bullying are common among many countries, be they poor or rich. The COVID-19 pandemic has moreover shown how deeply unprepared the education system is in coping with disruptions. As a result, disadvantaged students are even more vulnerable and are at greater risk of being left behind. We gather here today. We take part and attempt to tackle these daunting problems. We come to learn from one another, share expertise, exchange insights, and forge new partnerships so that we can speed up our progress towards achieving education for all. As such, I hope that this conference will serve as a compass in guiding us to where we should go next, what we should do, and remind us that we are not alone. Your Royal Highness worked in the past 40 years on improving education and well-being of disadvantaged children has set an example for us to follow. We are inspired by Your Royal Highness' aspiration and dedication. As such, I hope we can continue to work towards our common goal of achieving equitable education for all. May it please Your Royal Highness.
May it please Your Royal Highness. May I express my gratitude to Your Royal Highness for graciously presiding over the opening ceremony of the International Conference on Equitable Education, All for Education. Your Royal Highness has dedicated time and efforts to educational provision long before the World Conference on Education for All was organized in Jomtien, 1990. When the high-level group on Education for All meeting was organized to commemorate the 20th anniversary of the Jomtien Declaration, Your Royal Highness also graciously presided over the meeting. We are so grateful for Your Royal Highness' commitment to providing education for all. Since this year is the 30th anniversary on the Education for All efforts, this International Conference on Equitable Education, All for Education, takes place in Bangkok to acknowledge the progress of the Education for All efforts. At the same time, this conference also creates an opportunity to explore why equality in education is still a current challenge for many countries. This conference provides an opportunity for all, including the civil society, to propose policies and best practices on equitable education. It is high time for the public sector and the civil society to work closely and move forward together. During the past 30 years, the Ministry of Education of Thailand has strongly committed to fulfill the Education for All, or EFA, goals. For example, the 15 Years Free Education Project was launched in 2009 to ensure a basic education of quality for all and to increase level of attainment from kindergarten to the end of upper secondary level. Thailand established over 9,000 community learning centers and over 400,000 villages libraries and literacy curriculum to promote literacy among adults. To reach the vulnerable children, the Equitable Educational Fund was established in 2018 to increase equality in education by providing financial support for disadvantaged students. Education is viewed as the most important mechanism to achieve all 17 goals in the UN 2030 agenda. However, we all have a long way to go towards the achievement of the Sustainable Development Goals for SDG 4, which aim to ensure inclusive and equitable quality education and promote lifelong learning opportunities for all. So there are many things to do, and International Conference is one of the consolidated efforts that all sectors join their hands in making it possible. In line with the new normal, this International Conference on Equitable Education, All for Education, fully embraces virtual participation. A large number of our speakers and participants are joining us online and through social media. It is the situation which we would have not imagined just a few months ago, but which is now more common and is part of our new normal. This is how we will have to think about how education might have to be delivered in the post-COVID-19 world. May I please Your Royal Highness.
It is my great pleasure to preside at the first International Conference on Equitable Education, All for Education. The conference is very timely. This is because of the COVID-19 pandemic has made equitable education being a centered issue, has become an urgent issue. The pandemic has widened the gap of equity in education around the world and has made the vulnerable and disadvantaged children more vulnerable. Thus, this conference is important for all of us to work together to help children who receive the most impact to have access to education. Education is a fundamental human right. With this notion, the journey in pursuing equal access to education for all goal, first started in 1990 in Jom Tien, Thailand. I'm very pleased that Thailand hosted that event, bringing together leading educators and policymakers from around the world. Since then, equity is recognized as a critical factor. Countries around the world and many international organizations have embarked on their own journey based on their priority needs, country context, and political will to foster inclusive and promote equity education for all children. After 30 years, the challenges in equitable education still remains. The most common struggle among the challenges is to reach the unreached. For me, I have started my journey 40 years ago. I strongly believe that fundamental to learning involves not only education, but equally important nutrition, health, appropriate skills, and environmental together. It is important to fulfill children's basic needs first before they can learn, and learning should include both formal and non-formal learning. Learning and education should be viewed as more than just knowledge acquisition. It should be viewed as skill for lifelong learning so that the disadvantaged children are able to function in the society and have better quality of life. I believe all children must be given equal opportunity to learn. I believe that there is more than one approach to ensure that children attain abilities, skills, and values needed for quality of life and work. I believe it can be achieved through the power of partnership. I believe it is the responsibility of everyone. I am pleased to share with you more on my endeavor on this issue in my presentation this morning. We have come a long way since Education for All in Jom Tien, Thailand in 1990. EFA has transformed into Millennium Development Goals, Education for Sustainable Development, and now Sustainable Development Goals. I am glad to see that the commitment is still there. This reflects in the gathering of this international conference that I see many think tank educators, leading organizations from around the world sharing their experiences, knowledge, and aspiration. It is a good opportunity for everyone to find a way to eliminate inequity in education. We can learn from each other practices to move forward to achieve the goal of equity with quality in education, which expands and builds on Sustainable Development Goal 4 in 2030. We are in the better position than 30 years ago. We should make the best use of our knowledge and experiences. I would like to thank the Princess Mahachakri Award Foundation, Education Equity Fund, the Ministry of Education, Ministry of Interior, the Ministry of Social and Human Security, UNESCO, UNICEF, and Save the Children for organizing this conference. I wish the conference a success. I now declare open the first international conference on equitable education, All for Education. Thank you.
Her Royal Highness Princess Maha Chakri Sirinthorn has paid great attention to the development of disadvantaged children and youth so that they will have equal opportunities and a better quality of life. This special attention came about as a result of her decent upbringing under the care of the royal parents, His Majesty King Bhumibol Adulyadej the Great and Her Majesty Queen Sirikit, the Queen Mother, as well as the royal grandmother, Her Royal Highness Princess Nakarintara. She looked up to them as role models in learning principles and methods of working for the people. Seeing people living in poverty, Her Royal Highness realizes that she has a more comfortable life than them and wishes to offer a helping hand. When she accompanied the royal parents to rural remote areas, Her Royal Highness often received her homework assignments to deal with various problems. In so doing, she has become well aware of the state of being deprived and facing scarcity and thought about tackling these problems. That was the reason why Her Royal Highness has accumulated experience and collected relevant information before launching royal development projects. Her Royal Highness Princess Maha Chakri Sirinthorn always extends loving kindness to children and youth. She found that many children and youth in disadvantaged remote areas suffered from malnutrition with poor health and lack of educational opportunities. Her Royal Highness then started with launching the Agriculture for School Lunch project on a trial basis in 1980 at 3 Border Patrol police schools in the western part of Thailand. At that time, many areas in the region were very far away and difficult to access. After 1 year operations, the project produced good results. Her Royal Highness decided to expand this project to other Border Patrol police schools across the country. The expansion led to the start of 8 royally initiated projects to enhance the quality of life in schools. In 1992, Her Royal Highness Princess Maha Chakri Sirinthorn initiated the start of the Development Plan for Children and Youth in Remote Areas, which has been carried out on a continual basis. Later, the plan has been expanded to cover more than 800 schools across Thailand. Apart from Border Patrol police schools, it has also been implemented in many other schools under the supervision of the Office of the Basic Education Commission, Ministry of Education. In addition, Her Royal Highness has also opened new educational institutions in deprived communities. The objectives are to upgrade the quality of life of children and youth, as well as developing education quality and enhancing the potential of schools as learning centers for development towards communities. Throughout 40 years of work to achieve education quality for poor and disadvantaged children and youth, Her Royal Highness has attached great importance to the use of schools as the base for several dimensions of development. She has provided equal educational opportunities for impoverished young people in remote areas by developing knowledge together with promoting good health and quality of life. Aware of the need to develop education quality for disadvantaged children, Her Royal Highness has graciously granted scholarships to students under the royal sponsorship to provide them with opportunities for further studies at a higher level. The royal support helps change the lives of many school children who have now become the citizens of high quality in their communities, society, and the country as a whole.
เป็นนักเรียนในพระราชานุเคราะห์เมื่อเป็นแล้วก็เป็นตลอดชีวิตเราเนี่ยก็คืออยู่โรงเรียนตชด.มาตั้งแต่เด็กๆได้รับความเมตตาจากพระองค์ท่านเหมือนกับทุกสิ่งทุกอย่างก็คือปลูกฝังเรามาตั้งแต่เด็กๆ
After having graduated with a bachelor's degree in the field of communicative English from the University of Calcutta in India, Hayasanibu applied to be a teacher at a boarding school in her hometown in Songkhla province. She was entrusted with taking care of 10 categories of disadvantaged children, as well as children affected by unrest in the southern border provinces of Thailand. Because of her deep gratitude for the benevolence of Her Royal Highness, who selected her as one of the scholarship recipients to study in India under royal sponsorship, Miss Hayas decided to keep some amount she had received from the Royal Scholarship Program. She returned it to Her Royal Highness so that the money would be granted to the next group of students under the royal sponsorship. The royal initiatives of Her Royal Highness Princess Mahachakri Sirinthorn are well balanced and inclusive. Her Royal Highness places importance on the group of people who have impacts on the learning of children and youth. She is concerned about the quality of life and living conditions of teachers, especially those in small schools who are facing difficulties in teaching management. The problem is caused by an inadequate number of teachers because of their frequent transfer to other places. It also leads to the lack of continuity and thus resulting in students being unable to read and write. Their academic performance is also low. Her Royal Highness helps ease the shortage of teachers. With her royal initiatives, teaching and learning media have been introduced in the forms of older students helping younger students and friends helping friends. School children from different classes may study together. In so doing, more students can read and write. In times of crisis, when students and teachers in distant areas do not yet have access to teaching and learning technology, Her Royal Highness has introduced the distribution of royal aid packages for education to schools that first need to open and manage teaching and learning for students. The program is carried out by the Fund for the Development of Children and Youth in Remote Areas in the fight against the COVID-19 pandemic. Her Royal Highness realizes that literacy is the starting point of opportunities for the development of children's quality of life. The program will provide teaching aids for teachers and helps boost their morale so that they will be able to work with greater efficiency. Aware of the importance of quality teachers in building quality human resources, Her Royal Highness has promoted the development of teachers, aiming for developing education quality. She graciously grants scholarships to teacher education students who will develop children and youth in their hometown after their graduation.
พระองค์ท่านที่เดินปั๊บเนี่ยท่านจะเลคเชอร์จดมาเลยว่าแล้วตรงไหนที่มีปัญหาหรืออะไรต่างๆก็มาถกเถียงหรือว่ามาคุยกันในนี้จะแก้ปัญหายังไงให้หน่วยงานการว่าจะช่วยหรือว่าใครรับผิดชอบตรงนี้ช่วยหน่อยคือพระองค์ติดตามงานทุกเรื่องที่พระองค์ได้ผ่านสายตามาเสด็จรอบแรกปั๊บเนี่ยแล้วพระองค์เนี่ยก็จะถามตลอดเลยว่าเรื่องนั้นเป็นยังไงแล้วเสร็จหรือยังแก้ปัญหาได้ยัง
With her perseverance, efforts, and dedication, Her Royal Highness has continued to work in promoting educational quality throughout the 40-year period. All Thai people can feel that Her Royal Highness always puts her heart into everything she does. The benevolence of Her Royal Highness Princess Mahachakri Sirinthorn has been extended to not only Thai people and children, but also to the people in neighboring countries. Her Royal Highness has offered assistance to 107 schools in 10 countries. She intends to develop the people's quality of life through royal initiatives so that they will have good health and better living conditions. Her Royal Highness has worked devotedly for the benefit of the people. Her achievements are evident, and they have been admired and recognized by the world community, especially her assistance for disadvantaged children and youth. In 2005, Her Royal Highness Princess Maha Chakri Sirinthorn was appointed UNESCO Goodwill Ambassador for the empowerment of minority children and through the preservation of their intangible cultural heritage. Later in 2018, the United Nations Children's Fund, or UNICEF, presented a Lifetime Achievement Award to Her Royal Highness for her significant contributions for improving the lives of children in Thailand, especially the most disadvantaged. Throughout her 40 years of work for disadvantaged children and youth, Her Royal Highness has played a leading role in reducing educational inequality with her wide vision, perseverance, and firm intention. More importantly, Her Royal Highness is recognized as the Educator Princess and a role model in working to make education equal for all.
Good morning, everyone. I'm allowed to take this off because I am afraid that if I talk through this mask, nobody can understand me. So I just work in my own project for 40 years, but I have to say that before that, about maybe 50 years ago, I started working in education by learning from my parents. At that time, they go to the rural area and meet people. I have to work to, my task is to interview people, especially in terms of the education, so as whether this family need scholarship for their children or not, and I have to note down the situation in these people's life in every aspect, so that we can assess how much help they would like to, they should have, and so all other information. This is how I learn bit by bit, not just that I can start my work in 40 years ago. The equitable education or equal rights to education is the concept existed in Thailand, I think more than 100 years ago. My great-grandfather, King Chulalongkorn, or King Rama V, said that everybody should have had an equal opportunity to be educated. He meant all children, those of his own, as well as all the citizens' children. He said, "It is something that I'll try to accomplish during my reign." Other key word of our today's topic is all for education. This signified that we pull all the resources for education, integrated actions, and interdisciplinary efforts to accomplish the educational goals. To me, the right to education, together with the rights to good food, nutrition, and health care, are basic human rights of everyone. However, it is not that simple. King Rama VI was the first to announce the Compulsory Education Act for all Thais, and I heard about compulsory education since I was young. Despite the law, some children could not go to school. For example, children with disabilities and children who had to take care of their family members. In the law, they mention all these 2 points and other points that the children can be exempt from the compulsory education. Now, there are special schools for people with disabilities. Some can even study in regular classes with other children with the help of some extra teachers. I know a stone-deaf person who completed her PhD in a world-leading university abroad, and now she works as a scientist in a scientific research institute in Thailand. We can name it the Synchrotron Light Research Institute. We try to explain why it is important that children with special needs should get education and advise their parents that the children should study, if not in the regular school, they should go to using the facilities of the Bureau of Non-Formal and Informal Education. Education should be service, not something just compulsory. We do not force them to study, but we should give service to everybody. So let's return to King Chulalongkorn times. King Chulalongkorn reformed education for all Thai people along with the administrative reform in 1892. He set up the Ministry of Education and many schools for basic primary and secondary education. Vocational education and higher education in many disciplines, and for male and female. At the primary level, children learned to read and write Thai language, mathematics, and some vocational subjects such as agriculture and commerce. At the secondary education level, students studied science such as physics, chemistry, biology, and high mathematics. They also studied social sciences such as history, geography, and foreign languages such as English, French, German, Pali, or Sanskrit, and Latin for people who wanted to become medical doctors or to work in legal profession. The concept of all for education is evident here, as we need people with different specialization to work together for educational purposes. At that time, education reform in Bangkok went on quite well, but that outside Bangkok was too slow. King Chulalongkorn consulted with his half-brothers, the Ministry of Interior, and the Supreme Patriarch. Those two helped a lot by establishing schools in the temples, and both monks and laymen become teachers. The Ministry of Education published textbooks. There were not enough teachers, especially English teachers. For novices, religious courses and Pali languages were included in their curriculum. If there were vacant spaces in the temple near the school, it was the policy to grow crops and trees there, to teach the children about agriculture and to raise funds for the school and to provide good food for the children. So the nutrition program started just that, even that time. If any child did well in school, he would get a scholarship to continue his study at a high level, either in the country or abroad. Later on, there was more reform in education. Though boys had more opportunity, There were also schools for girls. I learned that monks started classes for girls. In secondary and higher education, girls could study many subjects. The popular ones were education or teaching, nursing, and home economics. I will talk about an experience in equitable education and all for education. During the reign of my father, schools were under many agencies: Ministry of Education, Ministry of Interior, Northern Royal Projects, and Police Department, and so on. My parents and my grandmother built many schools in both city and remote areas. They supported government boarding schools and schools for children with disabilities. In fact, we talk only about my great-grandfather and my parents, my grandmother. But in fact, my grandfather worked much to promote education, not only in education in medical field that he's famous for, but he promoted education in general as well. Now, another teaching media that my father have thought of is the encyclopedia for youth and children. My father set up a committee to write a set of encyclopedia for youth. Now there are at least 41 volumes, perhaps 42 already. He had an idea to create this set of encyclopedia in 1963. He explained to me that he would make this encyclopedia similar to the Book of Knowledge, a treasure island of your own, the book that I had seen in my parents' dining room. My father's encyclopedia, or the Book of Knowledge, has a different feature. One article has 3 levels. The first level is appropriate for all the children and adults who are not an expert on the matter. The second level is for upper primary classes and lower secondary levels. The third level is for lower primary classes. Elder siblings can teach younger siblings. Now we added questions and answers books and small books on each topic, which are not expensive. Though each volume of the big book is quite expensive, well-to-do people can buy these volumes, and the organization put the donors' names on the books and donates them to schools. Hermit school sounds quite strange. Or in Thai, โรงเรียนพระดาบท was a school named and established by my father. He explained to me that in the old-time legends or musical folk drama, king's sons who wanted knowledge had to go to the forest to learn from ascetics or hermits. That is where the name of the school came from. Here, students do not normally pay the fee, but they have to study diligently and respect the teachers. In the old day, they had to find fruits and other kind of food for their teacher. Now our school is in the city, a concrete forest. The modern hermits are volunteers and students are from poor families. Though graduates at the beginning do not get any official certificate, but later they get the certificate as if they go to other schools. They have to work hard and behave well to be there. The hermit teach them knowledge, skills, and ethics. This is started in 1975. They have to be good citizen of the country. The foundation pays for the accommodation, equipment, pocket money, and food for both students and teachers. At the moment, the subjects taught are mechanics, electric and electronics, carpentry and furniture, welding, technician maintenance, and sufficient economy for agriculture. In fact, my father said that anybody have knowledge of any knowledge, and anybody who want to study they can be hermits. No need to be technical people. The students are people who want to find jobs, such as disabled war veterans or other poor people. For female trainees, the most popular course which is in great demand is caregivers for patients and elderly. The employers have to book in advance for at least a year to get the trained caregivers. Even I myself, when I want a caregivers for my nanny, and I have to wait about a year. Sons of the Hermit School, โรงเรียนลูกพระดาบท at Smut Prakan was established in 1998. At first, there was a plan to collaborate with a private enterprise, but that company did not manage to take part in the CSR. There are many training courses such as hydroponic vegetable growing, green or bioagriculture, agriculture in saline soil, animal husbandry, orchid cultivation, mushroom cultivation, making of hand gel, liquid soap, Citronella mosquito repellent. There are some experiments too, such as alternative energy. Apart from giving training to Thai people, they were training foreigners that come from overseas, such as agronomists from Swaziland. Unfortunately, some training programs have to be postponed at the moment because of the viral pandemic. The Hermit School in the southern border area, โรงเรียนพระดาบทจังหวัดชายแดนภาคใต้ is for poverty-stricken male youth of 18 to 25 years old who had no education opportunity. Students must not be drug addicts. The courses offered in this school are motorcycle maintenance, car maintenance, and electricity. Besides technical subjects, the school also offers some life skill subjects such as Thai language for communication, computer, English language, sufficient economy, agriculture, and religious studies. There are also some club activities such as music club, local crafts club, agriculture club, etc. The school is a boarding school. Students and teachers live in a dormitory where teachers can share more experiences with the students. We expect them to become good members of the society in the future. Not only teachers, but also many government agencies and private companies join hands in providing education for those youths. Welfare schools. There are many special schools under the administration of Special Education Bureau, Ministry of Education. The government welfare boarding school started in 1953, before I was born. There are ศึกษาสงเคราะห์ schools and ราชประชานุเคราะห์ schools that I have an opportunity to work with. There are schools for children that the government has to provide special support. For example, children living in remote and difficult terrains on high mountains with no road access on their villages, or their villages are located in national parks. Many of them come from various ethnic groups. Some are orphans without family support. Most welfare education begin from grade 1 up to grade 12. However, there are some schools that have kindergarten or daycare centers because young children have to follow their older siblings to school. These little kids are lucky because they have good education teacher for they have the opportunity to start it when they were very young and very early in life. They get education and also good food. Apart from knowledge, from the usual syllabus, children and teachers, especially students, can have agricultural products to eat, preserve, and process. They learn how to sew, weave, and do other handicrafts. Then some of them just open the shop for the work they have learned, such as hair cutting or maintenance or mechanics work. Children, some of the children set up mini company in the schools, so they have the like business or entrepreneurship training as well. So they can sell their products either in the school cooperative store or in special handicraft shop or even with e-commerce. IT for education. 25 years ago, I started the IT Foundation, which has many activities for schools and in the remote and poverty-stricken areas. We try to find second-hand computer in good condition, and we have the maintenance as well. Mostly, these computers come from companies. As the computers were expensive, some computer experts volunteered to help in the maintenance, and they visited those schools from time to time. The travel expenses were also expensive and time-consuming, so I asked them to take my checklist to check other matters for me. For example, the condition of toilets, water supply, and libraries, etc. Now there are more junior high school and high schools at the levels of districts and sub-districts. And so students do not have to attend only the government boarding school. Still, students want to attend those schools, and they usually do not have enough dormitories, rice and food. And even now in the normal school, in the normal high school, they have dormitory for students who live very far from schools, and they have to donate the things that needed to the schools, or building more dormitories and provide rice and other necessities. But the school, the government boarding school have more budget than the other schools with dormitory, so they depends much on the donation of anybody, the people who can help. Schools for children with disabilities. I would like to talk about the schools for children with disabilities and the centers for people with disabilities. There are blind and low vision schools, deaf school, or people who just have the hard of hearing. It is for the children, and school for the children with motor disabilities, and school for children with mental disabilities. When I was very young, my parents arranged a New Year party for children with all kinds of disabilities. So I learned from very young age that many people had some kind of difficulty that I'm lucky enough not to have. And so their parents have problems in looking after their disabled kids. When I grew up, in the beginning, I worked a lot with the blind and the deaf and the people with moderate disability. And then headmistress of the school for children with mental disability persuaded me to work with her on the children with mental disabilities. At first, I was quite reluctant because to look after people with mental disability or people who have some shortcomings in learning is quite difficult and also very complicated. But I learned from the headmistress and other teachers, and while learning, I acquired some of the knowledge. And the children in the school, there are learning disabilities, autism, and Down syndrome. Some children have various kinds of disability but they can mix in classes with regular students. The Ministry of Education provides some special education teachers for the general school as well, which is very useful. I have a case that I can explain to you. That my mother looked after also the sick people and also people with disabilities. There's one child who even cannot stand up. He's very disabled. And I would like to send him to this school. But at first the teacher that he's too disabled to be in the disabled school. Oh, please help me. Okay, I'll try. But later on he can stand up, he can walk, and he can work as looking after hens so that they can keep the egg for the school in the beginning. At first, he don't know the strength of his hand, and he take the egg and then squeeze. The eggs all broken. And later on, he learned how to use his hand properly. In the end, he started the business at home. So this household have more income because of this disabled child. The Department of Mental Health, the Ministry of Public Health, has a method to test the children and then improve condition of delayed development in children. It is quite successful, and now we continue this project. Each province has a center for people with disabilities. The difficulty is to help people with disabilities to work because workplaces normally do not have suitable accommodation and facilities. I have found that the most challenging thing is to help the people with multiple disabilities and mental disabilities. But anyway, I think we can overcome all these challenges. I create our International Convention on Rehabilitative Engineering and Assistive Technology. It's an annual conference established since 2007 as a result of my work on people with disabilities with Singaporean professors. We have tried to find ways to help people with disabilities to live their lives, get education, get employment, and get recreation just like others. Apart from the academic conference, I create is a venue for students in innovation contest once a year to get new ideas from young people. We encourage the winners to put their ideas to marketable products. Special welfare school. There are many welfare schools, but what I would like to use as example is Jit Ari Government Welfare Boarding School โรงเรียนศึกษาสงเคราะห์จิตอารี It was a private school of the Foundation for Helping People with Leprosy, founded in 1957. This school separated children of the lepers from their families and educated them. At that time, people believed that leprosy was a genetic disease, so lepers' family was discriminated for fear of inheriting the incurable disease. In fact, other poor children in the neighborhood have come to study in the schools as well. In 1982, the school was transferred to the Ministry of Education, and classes for hearing impaired children were added. Now the school is considered one of the best welfare schools. Since 1953, there was a census by the Ministry of Public Health on numbers of people who suffered from leprosy. There were many leper communities and small hospitals and some medical staff. My father talked with the experts in 1956, and later he founded Rat Pracha Samasai Foundation, which means the king and the people helping one another. The foundation helps the lepers and trains personnel to look after them. There was also a research institute to study medication to treat the patient with leprosy. My father saw that some leper children in school age has no opportunity to go to school, so he set up school to provide education for them as well as other poor children in general, which is called Rat Pracha Samasai School. Later on, the school has also helped the children of AIDS victims. Now it is an honorary government welfare school. There are few government welfare schools that are specialized in helping the children of AIDS victims. I know a private boarding school that helped the daughters of AIDS victims, and some children were AIDS victims themselves. Daycare centers and kindergarten. There are daycare centers built by many government agencies and private donors. Kindergarten are separate schools, but they can be in the same school as elementary schools, junior highs, or even high schools. So they call these schools K-12 schools. Daycare centers look after children whose parents have to work with no grandparents' help. In the remote area, daycare centers help social workers a lot in weighing children, distributing nutritious food, conducting immunization program, and deworming children. We do not have to chase after children to catch them one by one to be immunized like I did before. In the former days when I worked in nutrition and immunization program, the most popular formula was rice, pea, and sesame that Dr. Graisit taught me. The single plate menus. An example of single plate menus is fried rice with eggs and chopped vegetable. Kids cannot be choosy, and teachers cannot choose good things to give only to their favorite students. Some theorists say that in a kindergarten, one should not teach only regular subjects, but should train the children to have social skills and gross and fine motor skills. In my opinion, for schools in the remote border area, education cannot be equitable unless the children start education early than primary one. Right education in early childhood make a difference. I hired the teachers whose major was early childhood to teach kindergarten kids. In the second kindergarten year, they engage in the activity called Little Scientist's House, like Haus der kleinen Forscher in Germany. This is implemented in almost 30,000 schools all over Thailand. Children learn about reasoning, observing, and conducting scientific experience about things around them. We have 240 local networks, 19 core trainers, and 5 senior core trainers. But 6 children in hospitals. I have worked with, I would work for the Thai Red Cross for about 43 years in King Chulalongkorn Memorial Hospital or Chulalongkorn hospitals run by the Thai Red Cross. There are some children who have been hospitalized for a long period of time, and non-formal education personnel helps teach these sick children in hospitals. In this hospital, there were not enough teachers, so I introduced the use of computers. Later on, the hospitals of the Ministry of Public Health were interested in the project. They cooperate with the Non-Formal and Informal Education Bureau, and some hospitals hire additional part-time teachers from teacher training universities. Non-formal education and learning centers in remote areas. The Bureau of Non-Formal and Informal Education, GSN in Thai, was well known for its mission on adult education, providing education through correspondence by mail. It also looked after public libraries. Later on, it also took care of educational centers for hill tribes, ศูนย์การเรียนชุมชนไทยภูเขา GSN, mainly on high mountains in very remote areas, starting with adult education. The hill tribe people in the vicinity could understand, speak, read, and write Thai. They could take examination to get the certificates of primary level, junior high school, and high school. And many people continue in the teaching university, Ratchapat. Children who live with their parents on the mountains cannot go even to the nearest schools, so the teacher teaches both adults and children. Eventually, teachers know more about teaching children, so the retired teachers volunteer to train the new batch of teachers. Non-formal education has many other tasks. For example, teaching in Bono or madrasa, Islamic schools, teaching in hospitals during national calamities such as flood or even man-made calamity. This GSN help a lot. Once I watched TV and saw there were shooting near the border, and the children have to move far away from their home and their schools, and the children were running about without doing anything useful. So I asked the non-formal education people to arrange the make-do classes for them, and it works quite well. Religious schools. I know about private school teaching Islamic religion, or in Malay, Bono, or madrasa in Arabic. โรงเรียนเอกชนสอนศาสนาอิสลาม because some children who finished their studies from the Border Patrol Police schools and the school run by the Ministry of Education, SPT, continue their studies in Bono schools. I follow those children up because I wanted to know how they were doing now. Before, Islamic schools taught only religious studies. Later on, the Office of the Private Education Commission สำนักงานคณะกรรมการส่งเสริมการศึกษาเอกชน sent the teachers to teach general knowledge. Some volunteers teach other subjects, such as computers. Some schools help teach by a two-way online system and a virtual lab. Some technical subjects are taught by technical and vocational colleges. We have network. In this way, many graduates from school have passed the university entrance examinations. some graduate could get into health science program of a famous universities. Again, in many schools, the Gosano help. Buddhist schools, โรงเรียนพระปริยัติธรรม are the school for boys who are ordained as Buddhist novices. They study both Buddhism and languages, Pali, Thai, and English. They study some local tradition and are trained to do handicrafts. I helped the school to arrange similar activities as those in Border Patrol police schools, for example, agriculture project, only plant and vegetables, water supply, cooperative shop, and nutrition program. There are Buddhist believers taking turn to cook for the monks' lunch at 11 a.m., serve milk, weigh the novices, do exercise such as sweeping the temple ground, doing yoga, working out in gym room, and going on expedition. For general subjects like computer and sciences, the novice can choose whether they would like to go to monk university for religious studies or to leave monkhood to study in the universities. But there's a university that allow a monk to study even he's still a monk. There's one monk who study physics, and at his free time, he teach Buddhist religion to his fellow students and to the teacher as well. But now I think he is leaving monkhood. Science course in novice schools are usually not good enough. Therefore, it is quite difficult if the novices leave monkhood and want to continue their studies in engineering, medicine, or nursing, etc. Nevertheless, we tried, and it is possible. I have given scholarships to monk teachers to study in master degree program in environmental science so that monks can give sermons on environment in addition to the word of the Buddha. Believers should also know about the way to protect their environment. The situation about public health, hygiene, and sanitation in schools are mostly not bad at all, but some temples, they need improvements. For example, just during the height of the pandemic, the school closed, so โรงเรียนพระปริยัติธรรม closed too, and the children have to go back to the temple. And what we try to do is to help the monk, the novices to continue the studies. So we donated the money for the transportation of พระอาจารย์ or the teacher monk to the temples, and also we bought some television so that the novice can learn from distant learning TV, DLTV, and it worked well. And this is a smart TV that he can use thumb drive, put in some other courses on TV. Then when I tried to buy the TV, but the owner of the company said, no, you shouldn't pay. I will donate all these more than 100 TV. But we have to chat a bit in Chinese because it is a Chinese company. So I have the opportunity to practice my Chinese. And now if there's something happened, I think we can use TV in more places. And I'm glad because the children around the temples are also very poor. They have no computer, no TV. So they came to the temples and study along with the novices. Education in prisons. In prison, some inmates are illiterate. They are warders who teach the inmates to read and write very well. I read somewhere about the prison libraries in England, and the inmates could write short stories. So we set up the libraries in the prison and encourage the inmates to write short stories, then to learn how to paint and to do other activities, not only the crafts. Even foreign inmates can read Thai, and there are many library activities. The foreign inmates has become the best reader to read even more the Thai inmates. Computer classes are also arranged. There are courses in music, painting, cooking, and carpentry. But we are not allowed to go online for fear of e-trafficking, e-robbing, etc. But they learn the technique, so when they are out of the prison, they can earn the living as well. The Border Patrol Police Schools โรงเรียนตำรวจตระเวนชายแดน The school that I have been working with most are those run by Border Patrol Police. This school was founded 64 years ago. My parents, my grandmother, and some donors supported them. I have worked with the school for 40 years. If there was no COVID virus pandemic, I would have been able to visit Border Patrol Police School 1,000 times by September of this year. I hope I can still do the 1,000 time celebration. I have been to remote villages and seen that there were big problems in health, hygiene, and sanitation. Many children were malnourished, so I started by growing some fruit trees in few village schools. At that time, there were many agencies that supported lunch for many poor schools, such as the Foundation for Needy Students under the royal patronage of Her Majesty the Queen มูลนิธิช่วยนักเรียนขาดแคลนในพระบรมราชินูปถัมภ์ since 1961. One of my relatives suggested that it was not useful just to give them food. It was better to teach children to do farming, like growing vegetables, raising animals, raising fish, growing fruit trees. I thought that was a good idea, so I followed his advice. I had some money from my saving, and so there was no need for fundraising. Some people taught me knowledge on agriculture and nutrition, and I chose to work with the Border Patrol Police because I have been familiar with them since I was little. They were not teachers by profession, but they had access to poorest of the poor who lived in remote areas. It was during the Cold War, and there were fewer roads then. In the beginning, they just built shacks and taught the children they ran into. Their administration agreed and tried to help in whatever way they could. I remember well a poem written by one of the teachers. Quote, I am merely a fighter who braves the jungle to meet you. I have no high education degree. I have only forceful faith from within my soul that I will light the candle in order to brighten the wilderness, regardless of looks and languages. In spite of all the travel, I'll endure every hardship with a teacher's heart. Unquote. I don't know whether my translation is correct or not, but it's something like this. When I started the project, I brought some seeds, agricultural utensils, kitchen utensils, and condiments. A professor helped train the teachers for me. From the beginning, I used the knowledge about the 5 groups of nutritious food I studied when I was in the primary school. After I took a course in nutrition at the INMU, the Institute of Nutrition Mahidol University. The professor helped draw guidelines of food intakes such as vegetable, fruits, meat, eggs, and dried peas. We weighed and measured the height of the pupils. There are plenty of health issues. For example, we dealt with iodine deficiency by adding 2 drops of iodine solution in a liter of drinking water. We supplemented iron tablets for the severe iron deficiency. There were problems with malaria, and we used mosquito nets and tested medication. For different kinds of worm and parasites, toilet sanitation, footwears, and deworming were used. We taught them hand washing and bathing to treat skin diseases, hair cutting and hair washing with medication we used to get rid of lice. Dental care was introduced to cope with teeth problems, eyesight testing, eyeglasses, making a hospital visit helped them with their eye problems and other disabilities. Personal hygiene and sanitation introduced in the cleanliness concept to the village and the school. I would like to mention my late American mentor, the late Professor Dr. Nevin Scrimshaw. He often come to Thailand and travel elsewhere in the world. And I think he have a notebook writing the name of his the students and what kind of thing they're working. So when they meet us, or for example, when he met me, he asked, "What are you doing now?" And I have to explain to him what I'm doing now, what is my future project. And he added that, in fact, you should continue this way, what the kind of thing that you should do. So I follow his instruction every time we met. I had worked with primary schools and daycare centers. And then he said that I should have taken care of 0 to 3-year-old babies and paid attention to birth weights. The next year, he said I should have surveyed and follow up pregnant women. Then he talked about health education, including reproductive health. And it was particularly difficult for me because I mostly looked after primary school pupils. I dealt with only a few secondary school cases. And he also said that the secondary school or the teenage age group is also important in health matter. In fact, the problem teenagers is very important. There have been a lot of dropouts due to teen pregnancy, and the research conducted by teaching hospitals about teen pregnancy has shown that it affected the ability to learn. As a matter of fact, the teenager group is in general the most neglected group of all because everybody thinks that they are old enough to look after themselves. The scholarship. Since 1988, I have given scholarships to pupils who have finished grade 6 to continue their studies as high as they can. Most are poor and have no opportunity to attend secondary schools at that time. In the past, there was no secondary school near the BPP schools, so I had to send those students to the government welfare schools. Later on, there have been many good schools around the BPP school, so the Ministry of Education had advised me to send pupils to local schools. There was Kun Ying Kasama. There are other projects, such as giving extra lessons to pupils of grade 8 and grade 11. There are also counsel and tutoring for pupils who are preparing for entrance examination. I have also sent some pupils to India to study the bachelor degrees. Scholarships are also given to teachers' children. Scholarship help support disadvantaged children to develop up to their fullest potential. Though this year I'm incapable of arranging the project that I have done for a long time, but we use the online tutoring, and it's worked for a lot of people. School buildings. Before there were only few buildings in the school. Now with more pupils and more activities, they need more classrooms, toilets, bathrooms, and places to brush their teeth now to wash their hands. The teacher also look after family members of the pupils and help the health station in look after pregnant mothers. In some remote area, he or she also acts as like a midwife. The teacher helps malaria unit in checking on malaria problem. He or she can use microscope to find out whether the strain is PV, Plasmodium vivax, or PF, Plasmodium falciparum. In some remote area, health station is built right in the school. Apart from a teacher, there is another trained employee to deal with telemedicine through the connection with bigger hospital. The health station look after health of people, school staff, and village. It is very effective. School should have a dining room that can be used for other activities when needed. Nearby there is a kitchen and storage of vegetables and other important items such as rice, powdered milk, sugar, condiments, and iodized sauce, etc. Villagers can take turn in cooking. They work together with the teachers and some pupils. Pupils also learn about mathematics and science as they turn the kitchen wastes into biofertilizer and animal feed, etc. Cooperative room has a corner or a small building for a cooperative shop to sell farm products of school and villagers, and also use things for daily life. Children learn how to run the shop. Accounting is taught by cooperative promotion department and the cooperative auditing department. There is a meeting room for the committee members to discuss about how they can improve performance of the cooperative and what kind of goods they want to sell. Children learn accounting, mathematics, and computer in this activity, and the committee has an opportunity to go for the study tour, mainly to see other cooperative. During the COVID-19 school, I distribute the leaflet about cooperative along with the knowledge of COVID as well. Vocational school library is not only for pupils and teachers, but also for alumni and villagers who can come to read and borrow books. And there can be many activities in the library, such as storytelling, questions and answers from the encyclopedia, writing your favorite books, etc. Agriculture is our main activity. In addition to the national syllabus, agriculture colleges, palace agronomists, Ministry of Agriculture, and other volunteers help the school with some training. Our aim is to have nutritious food for children, so there must be a way to grow vegetable for food for the whole term. The example of vegetable are morning glory, Chinese cabbage, and other kinds of cabbage. Many kinds of gourd, spring onion, eggplant, cucumber, lemongrass, chili, broccoli, kale, lettuce, chive, etc. Vegetable can be grown in vegetable plots, containers, and wooden tunnels, etc. We also have fruit trees. It is not easy to have enough fruits for all the people because the planting areas is not enough. First, we try to grow fruit trees that bear fruits fast, for example, banana, many varieties, papaya, jackfruit, mango, lemon, mulberry, passion fruit, dragon fruit, avocado, pineapple, custard apple, coconut, kaffir lime, okra, etc. Growing dried beans or peas such as green pea, soybean, pigeon pea, peanut, and bambara, groundnut, etc. It is not easy because it needs a big area where there was policy to give school children soybean milk. We had to buy some soybean and ground them in the stone mortar. It was not easy and time-consuming. Later, UHT milk and powdered milk were used instead. Children learned also the method of propagating trees. In animal husbandry, there are hens for eggs and battery cages and happy chicks, free-range system, indigenous roosters, meat roosters, ducks, Muscovy ducks, goat, pig, boars, and cows, etc. In fishery, there are activities in raising catfish, tilapia, nilotica, charnos, and some local fish. The people from the Department of Fishery also teach children how to preserve fish. In some schools, they raise frogs. Animal feed is also an important matter. Some have to be purchased and some can be produced in the farm. There are other activities such as growing mushroom, raising stingless bee. Vocational training. Vocational training for pupils have been conducted by vocational colleges of the Office of Vocational Education Commission, the Non-Formal and Informal Education Bureau, and local wisdom teachers. The courses offered are, for example, electric circuit, motorcycle and bicycle maintenance, hair cutting, cooking, food preserving and food processing, weaving, sewing, embroidery, broom making, basket weaving, flower arrangement, silversmith, mainly for secondary school, and handicraft. I thought of vocational training because 40 years ago, people without citizenship were not allowed to study too far away from home and even to receive primary school certificate. If such people did not have enough vocational skill, they may resort to illegal occupation. We also deal with marketing of the product. In BPP school, people have to learn to pay attention to the conservation of natural resources, for example, forest, soil, and water. They learn about reforestation, how to use vetiver grass to prevent soil erosion. Many schools join the project and plant germplasm conservation. Pupils are encouraged to join local festivals and religious ceremony. They learn about local and tribe cultures, stories, music, and dances. That's how they preserve the tradition and culture of their own. Center for Knowledge Transfer. Another activity of BPP schools is to arrange the school into learning centers or centers for knowledge transfer with different stations to teach agriculture, health and accounting, including management of personnel, farm and shop. Another activity is to transfer knowledge to the community near the school with some given materials such as seeds, fingerling of fish, tree sapling, chicks, and duckling, etc. Water. The school is gathering place for people, so water is very important for drinking and also for use in the toilet, bathroom, and kitchen. In the school with agricultural activity, water for agriculture is very important. Now it's not very easy to find water. It can be done by digging ponds and building weirs, dams, or reservoirs. We can build check dam by ourselves, but it often not give not enough water. We need experts to help. The people who have helped me are from the Rural Irrigation Department. They have the technique to find water, not only for our schools, but also for farmers in the area. Pipe systems have to be installed to bring water from the reservoir to schools and villages. Other source of rain is rainwater. We have to install rainwater trough and collect water container in some places. Not everywhere they can get the underground water. Water in the pond also can be used. If there are a lot of activities in agriculture, water may not be enough. In the quality of water may be not good enough, for example, too acidic. Drinking water even more difficult. It had also to be tested to make sure that there are no germs, and they're not contaminated by some toxic chemicals or heavy metals. Electricity. When I started working, electricity in schools were only for lighting in the daytime. And in the daytime, natural light was used. When the room was too dark, they took some roof tiles out and replaced them with transparent tiles. In the evening after dark, they use oil-operated generators. Later, the generators are run by solar cells. If the school were outside the national grid, there were too many electric gadgets, computer, overhead projector, rice cooker, refrigerators. Electricity may not be enough, and the batteries may not always be in good condition. The school was on fire from time to time. People thought terrorists burned the schools, but I thought that one of the causes might be electricity. I asked many agencies, government and private sectors to look into the matter. My suspects were electricity overload, or rats or cockroaches biting the electric wires, and my guesses turned out to be correct. Now the problems are mostly solved. Literacy, adult teachers, and even young children help teach their grandfathers and grandmothers in school, especially BPP school. The teachers in each division check the performance of the pupils based on the level of their reading and writing with various techniques. Then retest them. Citizenship. Thailand borders are porous. Many parts are mountainous and sparsely inhabited. Some people call those parts the no man's land. There are many ethnic groups living in those areas. We usually do not know which country we are standing on. In the past, people on 2 or 3 sides of the border were relatives. They lived on cultivation and trade. Now they attend schools and need to have citizenship. Stateless people have difficult lives because people with Thai citizenship have a better chance of getting education and going to hospitals. This was more difficult decades ago, but now they are allowed to study, to go to the hospitals. The most difficult situation was that they could not easily get good jobs and government services. Now I was told that people who can apply for citizenship should get a university degree and work for the country for a while. I do not know whether it would be possible for them to work with non-governmental organizations first and then apply for citizenship before getting better jobs in an official or a private sector. School mapping. Now we know that there are places that need schools or lack of educational service. This question came into my head when I studied remote sensing and geographical information system. We can look at the aerial photos or satellite imageries to see where the communities are. We can also have the people like BPPs who are good at forest trotting and mountain climbing to do the survey for us. If there's no school, we can arrange one and start planning a child life, starting from kindergarten to primary school, secondary school, university, bachelor, master, and doctoral degree. And then work with BPP or BEC, Bureau of Non-Formal and Informal Education, and so far it's quite effective. This another good example is of all for education. In conclusion, education during crisis. We have been working towards a goal of equitable education, all for education for years. Now we are challenged by worst pandemic of our time, caused by COVID-19, and it is seriously affect our children's education. And are we going to lose the battle this time? Now people talk about encourage our young people to study, even in crisis like this. We have been through many obstacles before, like tsunami, big flood, and political unrest, and we have overcome some, though not all of them. Now people talk about online education, but in some places, children are too poor to have computers. Even one who do may find our courses not interesting. Some may not have good enough access to new teaching media. During the last flood, we distribute survival bag with things that one could use without leaving the house for a few days. For children, we added survival bag for education. I cannot remember exactly what were in the bags. Now we are in COVID crisis, and we have also prepared survival bag for education. This time, the bag consists of self-learning kit called Teaching Media on the 60th birthday anniversary. It is a set of instruction for Thai language and mathematics courses. In some villages, teaching clips are used and children do their homework. The teachers can grade the homework with help from volunteer messengers. In the back, we should also provide teaching media about COVID-19, exercise book, pencil, rubber, cloth masks, mung bean, and manual on how to grow bean sprout, some vegetable seeds, and family accounting bag. In this crisis, Meals on Wheels is not convenient, so we have to give families some material for cooking. So the other activity I talk about teachers who travel on to people's house to teach, which they call themselves horseback teachers. I try to provide four-wheel drive car called off-road truck to take BPP teachers to children's houses. But anyway, I can't give enough cars, so they have to find all kinds of vehicles to be able to teach. Many teachers join my group for food production for communities and the project of Model Schools project. I asked the military personnel from military camps and bases near the school and near the community to help to grow vegetable, fruit tree, raising animals as a hen, duck, fish, frogs. These soldiers are from the project called Good Breed Soldiers, ทหารพันธุ์ดี and they are soldiers who are trained at our Chai Patana Foundation premises to propagate the good strain of vegetable, fruit trees, and animal. Good breed, not the soldiers' breed, but the animal and vegetables breed. Soldiers are good as well. They send their report to me every day. Now schools open, but the soldiers are still in the village and schools to teach agriculture and help teachers and the students to clean the schools. I asked some educational specialists to write a manual how to teach without being a teacher, how to use agriculture as a tool to teach 8 groups of subjects like Thai, foreign languages, math, science, art, music. We now have to help looking after health of children, prevent even common cold. I think whether we should have umbrella for them, because now it's a rainy season and even they don't have COVID, they may have common cold, which is quite bad as well. We promote cleanliness, we distribute soaps and alcohol gel and other disinfectants, checking everybody's temperature, promoting clean food. So far, about more than a week now, I have no report on somebody who have COVID yet. In 1990, I wrote a motto, let's join in making a literate world. When I worked, at that time it was when we worked at Jom Tien, as the minister was talking about. I worked with UNESCO and the Ministry of Education. And I write this, let's join in making a literate world. I continue to hold this the ideal and the ideal of education for all and for all for education. I talk too much now, so I should be allowed to stop. Thank you very much for your attention.
Hi, my name is Shuko. I'm 20 years old and I'm from Brunei.
မင်္ဂလာပါစမနာမည်ကနမ်တလာလို့ခေါ်ပါတယ်
สวัสดีค่ะ ชื่อนางสาวโอเป็นคนไร้สัญชาติคณะสังคมสงเคราะห์ศาสตร์มหาวิทยาลัยธรรมศาสตร์ชั้นปีที่ 1 ค่ะ
สวัสดีครับเอเป็กนะครับนักเรียนทุนวัตกรรมสายอาชีพรุ่นที่ 1 ครับ
Hello everyone, my name is Chang and currently I'm studying at Le Credon Secondary School in Lao Cai Province, Vietnam.
Hello everyone, my name is Gian and I am a student from Le Credon Secondary School which is located in Lao Cai Province in Vietnam.
Hi, I'm Troy from China.
Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
How do you do? My name is Rachana. I'm studying in grade 12 in Hong San Lipi High School.
Equity in education for me means fairness and inclusion. Fairness in the means that every individual can reach one's educational potential without having personal or social circumstances such as gender, ethnic background and family background as an obstacle.
กลุ่มคนในที่นี้นะคะก็คือเยาวชนเด็กและเยาวชนไม่ว่าจะเป็นใครก็ตามนะคะจะต้องได้รับพื้นฐานทางการศึกษาด้วยสิทธิและเสรีภาพของตนเองโดยที่ไม่มีกรอบหรือขีดจำกัดมาแบ่งแยกโอเองเป็นเด็กไร้สัญชาติซึ่งสิ่งเหล่านี้ค่ะมันไม่ได้เป็นข้อจำกัดที่จะทำให้การศึกษาเข้าไม่ถึงตัวพวกเขา
In rural areas, many students don't have the chance to go to school or they have to quit school very soon. With many female students, they have to put off their learning process and get married at a very young age.
ความเสมอภาคทางการศึกษาก็คือสิทธิเทียบเท่าระหว่างผู้ชายและแม่หญิงซึ่งว่าการศึกษาเรียนเพื่อสอบรู้สอบความก้าวหน้าของตัวเขาเองแต่ก่อนพ่อแม่จะบ่ส่งเสริมให้แม่หญิงได้เข้าเรียนหรือเรียนหนังสือจะให้แต่ผู้ชายเรียนแต่มาถึงปัจจุบันนี้ก็ได้มีการพัฒนาบุกบืนให้แม่หญิงได้เรียนหนังสือเทียบเท่ากับผู้ชาย
สิ่งที่เราจะต้องทำคือการทำให้เรามีจิตสำนึกรู้ถึงความเท่าเทียมและกระจายโอกาสไปยังเด็กทุกกลุ่มอย่างไม่มีการละเว้นหรือว่าสร้างข้อจำกัดให้กับใครค่ะ
ပြီးတော့အဖွဲ့အစည်းတွေကလည်းတန်းတူပညာရေးဆိုတဲ့အချက်ကိုအစိုးရကအတိအမှပြုလာနိုင်ဖို့အတွက်အရင်ကတည်းကပို့ပြီးတော့စူးစမ်းကြရမှာပေါ့
I highly recommend that the government together with the local authority should financially support the schooling fees for those who cannot afford going to school.
หน่วยงานภาครัฐต่างๆเนี่ยครับก็อาจจะช่วยในการเข้าถึงกลุ่มคนหรือว่ากระจายข่าวให้มากขึ้นเหมือนกับกลุ่มคนที่อยู่ในพื้นที่ห่างไกลพื้นที่ชนบทหรือว่าอาจจะเป็นบนดอยอะไรแบบนี้ครับที่ไม่ได้รับข่าวสารที่ทั่วถึงทำให้เขาพลาดโอกาสในการศึกษา
ก็อาจจะเป็นไปได้ว่าที่จะต้องไปแก้คือไปสร้างอาชีพให้กับกลุ่มคนชนบทให้มีอาชีพและมีรายได้ที่มั่นคงที่จะสามารถส่งลูกหลานของตัวเองเพื่อไปเรียนต่อในเมืองที่มีการศึกษาที่ดีได้ครับ
By providing financial aid directly to the families, it allows the younger people to focus only on their education rather than occupying their thoughts with how to sustain and uphold their own households.
It's an education that doesn't enforce students to be perfect, but success.
An education system that doesn't decide a particular intelligence of a student, but instead gives the student a choice to pick what stream they would like to pursue and what supports them the best.
An ideal education system for me is being inside the classroom without the feeling of being outcasted due to unfair treatments to students. Like the teachers, always in favor to those intelligent students than to those students who really need their attention and help.
And also getting practical knowledge and experiences need to be focused more than just theoretical knowledge.
By using and maybe utilizing the resources on the internet, the software program, and that technology, we can provide individual what to learn, what they want to learn for their future.
In my ideal education system, I see a school and a system where they encourage students to love to learn. Instead of being fed information and having to memorize all that, it's better to teach children the amazing thing of learning.
Equality is like basically treating everyone in the same way regardless of like their background. So you're giving everybody like more or less the same education, which might still make some people more privileged than others, because if you're already rich and you're receiving the same education, then you're I guess you could say you're more privileged and you have like resources left.
This is basically simply because our education system simply supports those which has more money to spend. For example, some people brought up tuition. Tuition is essentially just rich people getting better opportunities simply because they are rich. They get better tutors and teachers. A lot of teachers, not a lot, some I would say is a better word. Some teachers even prefer to just essentially go into tutoring simply because it's more profitable, simply because the education system doesn't support them in proper wages.
I realized how amazing it is to have the ability to think for myself and to have so much hunger and eager to learn. And I think that all students have the right to be provided with that kind of amazing environment.
ပြီးတော့ကျောင်းမတက်နိုင်တဲ့ကလေးတွေကိုလည်းကျောင်းတက်လာနိုင်အောင်ဘယ်လိုလုပ်ရမလဲဆိုတာတွေကိုနည်းလမ်းတွေစောင့်ပေးရမယ်။
ข้าพระพุทธเจ้านางสาวแก้วเดียวหลอกิติยกุล
ข้าพระพุทธเจ้านางสาวโดยาหลอกิติยกุล May it please your Royal Highness, with the goal of creating a unanimous message on equity in education from the youth, we first reached out to youth representatives from 13 countries, including Brunei, Cambodia, Vietnam, Myanmar, Laos, Indonesia, Malaysia, the Philippines, Thailand, Korea, Japan, and China, and sent them 3 guiding questions to find out more about their views on equity in education.
The 3 questions included the following. What does equitable education mean to you? How can we take steps towards achieving equity in education? and what would you see in your ideal education system? After receiving all the video entries, we invited each of them to attend a Zoom call where they would further discuss and build on each other's views. Despite language barriers and technical difficulties, we witnessed a powerfully interactive discussion between students from 13 different countries, all from different walks of life, united under the single cause of equitable education.
Today, we have curated their discussion into the following statement, which will cover 3 primary issues commonly raised in discussion. The first being income as a discriminatory factor for education. The second being ethnicity, gender, and intelligence as additional factors. And the last being fundamental issues with classroom teaching. We hope, as a true voice of the youth, that the points made in this statement will resonate in the future campaigns and projects of the government, of global organizations, and NGOs working towards equitable education. First off, the school system, one that favors the rich rather than the poor, must be reformed. Throughout the discussion, many students pointed out that the education system in their country favors the rich rather than the poor. This is due to the immense discrepancies in the quality of education between private and public schools, which means that poor students are given fewer opportunities to receive adequate education and thus higher income jobs.
To solve this, we must first eradicate the discrepancies that are disadvantaging poorer students. These discrepancies are fueled by 3 main points. 1. In rural areas, there is inadequate access to online classes, especially relevant with the COVID pandemic. This makes it substantially more difficult for lower income students to compete with those who do have online access, particularly in national examinations like the O-NET and in university applications.
Secondly, the tutoring system. In some countries, school classes are not taught to a sufficient standard, which pushes students to spend more on external tutors, thus allowing higher income students to perform better.
And third, poorer households have become attached to a belief system where they see a complete education as unnecessary to land a job, with many parents encouraging students to drop out in order to help their families financially.
Secondly, the school system discriminates not only on income and socioeconomic status, but also on other factors like ethnicity, intelligence, and gender. In many countries, the stateless youth are unable to pursue further education as university entry criteria to certain professional degrees require applicants to have a nationality. From the call, we also discovered that many students are labeled in terms of their intelligence and are treated differently based on their performance. This ends up restricting their potential growth and passion in specific subject areas. Lastly, several students also brought up problems of gender discrimination, not in their classrooms per se, but within their own households. Many households view females as less capable of making use of their education, thereby forgoing the enrollment of their daughters in high school, forcing them into arranged marriages at very young ages.
Thirdly, classes for students are still lacking in many ways. As of recent years, rote memorization has become the norm to exam success. Teachers are encouraging students to remember, not to think. In place of this, schools should be reformed to not only equip students with the required knowledge, but also to help students immerse themselves into what genuinely excites them in order to gain a deeply instilled love of learning. To omit subjects like the arts and humanities from school curriculums would simply be dismissing the passions and aspirations of our future generations. On top of this, there should be a shift in focus from not only theory-level teaching, but also the teaching of emotional intelligence, moral principles, and soft skills, qualities that equip students to thrive as they become adults.
As members of the upcoming generation, we believe that the way forward is not simply securing more education. It is securing better and more effective education. For governments all around the world and for global organizations working towards this campaign, we hope education is not seen as simply a tick box on a to-do list.
The children of future generations deserve more than simple dismissal. education, schools, and academic resources must be created with the intent of fostering the emotional maturity, intellectual curiosity, and benevolent drive of our students, not with the intent of satisfying a requirement.
We need to see schools not only with equipped teachers, adequate resources, and sufficient use of technology, but also schools with highly motivated teachers, resources tailored to students' needs, and technology that significantly enhances learning. We must ensure that not only do all children have access to education, but also an education that will allow them to develop into individuals that are capable of catalyzing positive change. May it please Your Royal Highness.
It has been over 70 years since the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, and with it, the confirmation that everybody has a right to education.
At the time, global education overall stood at a very worrying state due to a lack of basic education, the beginning of education for all, EFA.
Due to these concerns, the World Conference on Education for All was held at Jomtien Beach, Chonburi in 1990. The Jomtien Declaration laid the foundation to develop Education for All, EFA. The declaration focused on providing education to satisfy basic learning needs, as well as increasing access and participation.
At that time, there was still a debate around the issue of what kind of goals to have, whether you have aspirational goals, perhaps not realistic, but ones that would inspire countries to do better, or whether you had realistic goals that would be more likely to be achieved.
However, actual implementation fell short of expectations due to poverty, lack of teaching tools, and inadequate database management.
The evolution of education for all in the second decade.
Meanwhile, with several outcomes from Jomtien Declaration being unfulfilled, the World Education Forum was held in Dakar, Senegal, in that very year. In order to drive forward the goal of universal education by 2015, in the forum, it was revealed that gender inequality remained prominent, as well as the education for vulnerable and disadvantaged children.
Also, illiteracy remained high, and a high enrollment rate does not guarantee learning outcome. This led to the development of indicators that related to a quality of learning.
These issues had derived into United Nations Millennium Development Goals in 2000. The goal number 2 on education was aimed at universal primary education and promoting gender equality. Nevertheless, some progress had been made over 10 years. Therefore, the framework from Jomtien had been expanded with increased emphasis on equality and eliminating gender disparity, providing free and compulsory primary education for everyone. In Thailand, the Jomtien Declaration led to increased opportunities for education by means of law enforcement.
Past results revealed that primary and secondary enrollment rates have increased, as well as expanding and improving comprehensive early childhood care and education.
The literacy rate of Thais reached 97.7%.
The Asia and the Pacific EFA Mid-Decade Assessment in December 2010 emphasized increasing access to those without access to education, such as marginalized and disadvantaged populations, instead of focusing on increasing enrollment rate.
According to the Millennium Development Goals report in 2015,
there have been many achievements in universal primary education as a result of tailor-made educational policies. The Incheon Declaration, reflecting Sustainable Development Goal 4, committed governments to undertake steps towards guaranteeing education for all by 2030. That is, to impose SDGs 4, ensuring the rights to education, equity in education, inclusive education, quality education, and promoting lifelong learning as education targets for 2030. The challenges during these last stages of education development is not only EFA, Education for All, but AFE, All for Education.
Education would change. We need a new mindset. In a classical way, you bring the kids or the children to school to get education. The new mindset is that you bring education to the kids. So education would shift from school-based into village-based, and individual-based, and family-based. That's a new paradigm.
All efforts towards realizing this goal have been put on hold due to the COVID-19 outbreak, which rocked the education world. This might be the time to review how close we are to achieving our present goals. To this end, the conference partners will work together towards equitable education and sustainable development, as well as brace themselves for upcoming challenges, befitting the intent of all previous declarations to create a prosperous global community.
May it please Your Royal Highness, Professor Amartya Sen, Chairman of the first plenary session, Excellencies and distinguished guests, welcome to the first plenary session of the International Conference on Equitable Education, All for Education. The title of this plenary session is Equitable Education, What Does It Mean in the Changing World Amidst COVID-19 Pandemic? It is a great honor to moderate this session with an eminent chairman and prominent speakers. Before the session begins, please allow me to introduce the chairman of this plenary session. Professor Amartya Sen is currently Thomas Lamont University professor and professor of economics and philosophy at Harvard University. Professor Sen was awarded the 1998 Nobel Prize in Economic Science for his contribution to welfare economics and social choice theory, and for his interest in the problem of society poorest member. May I start by inviting Professor Amartya Sen to live introduce this plenary session from Boston, Massachusetts. It is already past midnight in Boston, Massachusetts now. May I invite Professor Amartya Sen to introduce this session to Her Royal Highness. Professor Sen, you may now begin. Thank you.
I'm not sure that I have much to say. Can you hear me at all?
Yes, sir.
You can hear me?
Yes, sir. We can hear you, sir.
Yeah. Because, again, I think the program got a bit mixed up compared with what I was told. So I think I was expecting some action earlier. But it's very nice to be here. It's very nice that such a meeting is taking place. It's very nice that the Royal Highness is present here. She's always a great source of inspiration and encouragement to everyone. So I hope the meeting goes well. I don't think I should be chairing any session because I'm quite exhausted also, having been teaching and involved with students all day and from the morning. But it's very good to, well, the most important thing, of course, is that the commitment to education for all that has been taken up is a very, very important one. and the international conference to celebrate it is certainly something we have very good reason to be happy about. And the importance of education comes from many directions. Leading a good life requires education, requires wisdom, but also requires education. Progress in social, economic, political fields depend on our education. And that way too, education has a contribution to make. But leading a life in which we can collaborate and interact with others requires also an education, and education therefore has all these different features. And finally, education gives one security, which we are learning more and more under COVID-19. And indeed, the countries which have been successful have benefited a lot from having a high level of general education. Thailand counts among them because the level of education here is higher than that in most developing countries. But of course it can go further, and if it goes further, more achievements could be made. The fact that if you look at my country, India, the fact that it has become now the third largest COVID-infected country is a terrible happening on one side. And yet the fact that the one state which had a high level of education, namely Kerala, escaped that, and only a handful of people died, and the epidemic, the pandemic, came under control very quickly through intelligent planning of testing, tracing contact, and taking appropriate counteractive action. That indicates how, with an educated society, you can deal with most problems, and even problems of the kind of COVID-19, which is new to the world, turns out to be one which education helps to control. So I think we admire education, and since this is a great boon for people, having equitable education is both good from the point of view of justice as well as good from the point of view of efficiency. So I'm delighted that this international conference is taking place. I'm delighted that Thailand has taken a commitment towards education for all in an even bigger way than it already had. And I'm also very happy that the people whom I have known from earlier on, like my old friend and classmate, Anand, former Prime Minister Anand, that they are involved in it. And of course, above all, is the fact that we are getting the blessing, the encouragement, and the leadership of the Royal Highness. And that is going to be part of the possibility, part of the leadership assets that Thailand could benefit from. So I'm delighted about that. It's quite late since I've been up since early morning seeing my students here in Boston. I must go, but I express my warmest greetings to everyone, and also good luck, and also show my appreciation of the active people here, and particularly the leadership of the Royal Highness. So with those words, I must go. Thank you very much.
May it please Your Royal Highness, would you like to speak to Professor Sen for about 5 to 10 minutes?
So Professor Sen, thank you very much on behalf of all of us here that you can come online to join with us in these very important activities that you help us to promote education in Thailand and perhaps in other places in the world. Then we still remember forward with thanks that when I took my students to Calcutta and you are kind enough to came to us and give us a lecture, and I took the note and type and distribute to everybody there for fear that maybe if some students miss some words, so they can have your lecture with them all the time. And so I'm grateful for that too.
Thank you very much.
And I hope that in the future I will have the chance of meeting you in person. Thank you very much, sir.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Professor Matayasen, Mr. Chair, for a very inspiring introduction. May it please Your Royal Highness, Excellencies, and distinguished guests, may I now invite the 3 speakers of this plenary session to comment their presentation. The plenary session 1 is now begin. Thank you. Your Royal Highness, Professor Amartya Sen, Chairman of the Plenary 1 session, Ms. Yasmin Sharif, Ms. Alice Albright, Dr. Prasan Tairat Vorakun, Excellency and distinguished guests. Welcome to the first plenary session of the International Conference on Equitable Education, All for Education. May I now invite Dr. Prasan to start the session. Dr. Prasan, the floor is yours.
Your Royal Highness, Professor Amartya Sen, Ms. Sharif, Ms. Albright, Excellency and distinguished guests. It is my privilege to be joining this plenary session with distinguished chair and speakers. The Equitable Education Fund is a new organization that looks up to the global organizations like the Global Partnership of Education, or GPE, and the Education Cannot Wait, ECW, as a benchmark and as an inspiration in designing and implementing our equitable education programs in Thailand. As a chair of the EEF's Board of Governance, I look forward to building a stronger partnership for the benefit of disadvantaged children, especially during the current global pandemic. 2020 is a very special year for the Equitable Education Agenda. Not only does it mark the 30th year of the World Declaration on Education for All in 1990, at the first World Conference on Education for All in Jomtien, Thailand. This year also starts the countdown to the last 10 years of the SDG 4. Throughout these past 3 decades, the Jomtien Declaration has been the inspirational cornerstone of both national and global commitment to education for all children across the world. More importantly, we have witnessed the progression of the EFA through Millennium Development Goals, and later the Sustainable Millennium Development Goals, and later the Sustainable Development Goals to be more equitable, more integrated, and more instrumental, just to name a few. However, it would be an understatement to say that 2020 has posed many challenges to achieving EFA to any education system globally. Before COVID-19, there was already a number of unfinished businesses we owe to our children and promises to deliver by 2030. Not only has this global pandemic worsened the pre-existing education inequities, it has introduced new hardships to our society. In a nutshell, I think COVID-19 has effectively redefined how education organizations like us do business from top to bottom. Chairman, if you would allow, after Jasmine's presentation on ECW and Alice on GPE, I will share with you the past 2-year experiences of the EEF and how we are coping with the COVID disruption.
Thank you very much, Dr. Prasan. This is a very stimulating initial intervention. I would like now to invite our next speaker, Ms. Yasmin Sharif, to move our conversation on equitable education agenda from the national level in Thailand to the global picture, as well as to shed some light on the impact of COVID-19 on our children around the world. Ms. Sharif, the floor is yours.
Royal Highness, Professor Amartya Sen, Dr. Prasan, and also my dear friend Alice Albright. It's my pleasure to be part of this panel, and it's also my pleasure to return to the beautiful Thailand, even though via remote, which I visited several times, and to be here together with you. Your Royal Highness, distinguished panel members, and ladies and gentlemen, I will start by giving a very broad outline of the Education Cannot Wait Global Fund. The Global Fund for Education and Emergency was established by the World Humanitarian Summit in 2016. Why was it established? Because there was a realization that despite all the efforts we do, and everyone is trying, there were an approximately 75 million children and young people in school age who did not access a quality education in countries affected by conflict or by refugee populations or by natural disasters. So we are speaking about those countries on earth that are in the darkest, most difficult of all situations. Countries like Afghanistan, Yemen, Iraq, Syria, Central African Republic, Chad, the whole Sahel, the Democratic Republic of Congo, and the Rohingyas who are hosted by Bangladesh, refugees, internally displaced, those who have lost everything because of violence and persecution and living in absolute abject poverty. They numbered before COVID-19 75 million. You have to have a very crisis-sensitive approach. And that's how Education Cannot Wait was created, to complement the Global Partnership for Education, complement other major funds doing education. Our job was to focus on crisis, conflict, and refugees. Now, when we look at COVID-19, the number of 75 million has only increased. The Malala Fund has estimates that 10 million girls, in addition, out of the 39 million, 50% of the 75 million, an additional 10 million of girls will now fall out of school and may never return as a result of COVID-19. In the countries who are currently affected by COVID-19 and yet has not reached the same numbers that we have elsewhere in the world. We look at sub-Saharan Africa, we look at parts of the Middle East, they have not reached, or at least not been able to monitor the same amount of number of COVID-19 cases, but nevertheless, their schools are closed. And when you are very poor, at absolute extreme poverty, and you are in a country of conflict or you're a refugee, then on top of it comes COVID-19 and you can't go to school, you are doubly affected. You have one massive human suffering that you've been struggling with for years, and now you have COVID-19 on top. So what we see today, because in many of these countries, you don't have the infrastructure for IT. You don't have infrastructure for web-based learning, access to a computer. You may not even have access to a radio or a television. Large parts of Afghanistan don't have electricity. Central African Republic will not have access to electricity or the infrastructure. So what it tells us is that COVID-19 has displayed to us the inequities, the socioeconomic inequities that are across the globe. A child in Sweden can study online from home and use web-based learning and technology. A child in Chad or in Nigeria or in South Sudan cannot. So what was already a huge divide in development has now further deepened that divide, because they are learning online, they can't even learn online. So, and what happens also because of the poverty is girls are especially at risk now, because with COVID-19 comes an economic recession. So girls, they're out of school, and what happens in countries of crisis and conflict is that they then risk to be subject to child marriage. The family may marry them away in order to be able to get some money, or the girl is sent to work. She might be 8 years, 9 years, so instead of going to school, she will be out working. She might be drawn into trafficking, and in the war economy often has a strong element of trafficking and prostitution. They might be drawn into early childbirth, being 10, 11, 12 years old to have a child. So there are so many dangers and threats towards girls in particular. This is not to say that boys are not also suffering, they are. Those who are suffering also are those children with disabilities. So even before COVID-19, they were refugees and they may not have access to educational facilities that would provide them support to attend school because they were in a wheelchair or similar. And now they're out of school, no livelihood, no learning, and they are also have disabilities. So, there's a large segment of this population that are particularly vulnerable. Now, we need solutions. So what education cannot wait as a global fund, we are hosted by UNICEF, but we serve the whole UN system. And then we work with private sector because they have a very big role to play. So since the breakout of COVID-19, and of course we are in the multilateral UN system, which is a crisis responder, we are able to move very fast. Education Cannot Wait had worked with all our partners, UN agencies, civil society, host governments in about 26 countries, such as the Sahel, such as Afghanistan, Palestine, Syria, the Rohingyas, and so forth, to deliver COVID-19 emergency response and distributed funding, 23 million. And next week, we are dispersing an additional 21 million. So in total, about $45 million have been dispersed by Education Cannot Wait by the end of next week to 30 countries affected by crisis. Where did this money go? It goes to getting all the agencies and the government, led by the government, UN agencies and civil society and communities and the refugees themselves come together to establish creative solutions during the out-of-school situation. Schools are used for hygiene, so that they wash their hands and keep clean, not to get infected by COVID-19. Radio apparates and enabling them to hook up to receive learning through radio and television, short-term radio and television. Where computers and technology is possible, school feeding, so that every child gets that daily school feeding, which they would never access otherwise. Material, school books, and also we pay all the teachers serving them within our investments. Because just because of COVID-19, the teacher must not suffer and lose their livelihood. We need them during COVID-19. Whether they are part of using the school to distribute sanitation and hygiene, or they deliver books at the doorstep of the children, or they are part of social distance learning where they can keep the 9 or 6 feet separation. So there are many creative ways of delivering a continuing education. One more thing that we do is that because education is also protection, there are hotlines for children, especially girls, who feel threatened and as a result of the COVID-19 threats. I mentioned a few to you. Hotlines and mentorship and support. However, this is not enough. And we also work and are rolling out our multi-year investments, which are more development oriented, so that when we now move from the recovery of COVID-19, from the emergency into the recovery in 30 crisis countries, 25 crisis countries, we are also rolling out our multi-year investments that will help build back better. For us, education is the foundation to build back better. Without education, we cannot achieve development. We cannot achieve the sustainable development goals. We need to invest in the human mind and the human soul of the new generation, and especially the children and youth who are today suffering doubly. They're suffering in addition of the conflicts and crisis and the poverty, because they grow up in violence, in a total breakdown of any protection that every child needs. And for us to achieve the sustainable development goals and also to achieve the 1919 Johnson Agreement, which means that everyone should have right to basic learning, we need to start with those who are left furthest behind. Because if we lose them, that will one day come back upon all of us. 75 million children and youth who do not have access to education, and all they see is violence, all they see is suffering, all they see is poverty, war, flight, no home. Either they will succumb to that human suffering and never arise again, or they will use whatever tool they have to fight back. Without an education, you cannot stand up against that suffering peacefully without violence. Education gives them the tools to arise out of this, to become productive citizens, to be empowered, and to make sure it never happens again. Education is their hope and their tool to become the most beautiful potential and the most productive fellow human being, and that they can be for their people, their societies, and for all of us. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Ms. Sharif. Even though we are thousands of miles apart from France and Thailand. We can feel your energy and your passion that I hope is the same magnitude as the problem that we face globally nowadays. So we're so happy to have the organization like you that we share the same passion and goals. And now I would like to invite our colleagues that run the same kind of organization, an education fund for the most vulnerable and the most deprived population around the world. May I now invite Ms. Alice Albright, the Chief Executive Officer of Global Partnership for Education, or GPE, to be our next speaker. Ms. Alice Albright, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much for inviting me to join you from afar. Very much appreciated. And it's a great pleasure to be with everybody. Let me start by explaining a little bit about what GPE does. The Global Partnership for Education is a partnership and a fund dedicated to SDG 4 to make sure that all children have an inclusive, equitable, and quality education. GPE believes that education systems need to be strengthened to deliver quality education to all children. So we support the development and implementation of education sector plans through funding, and critically by activating the partnership of key education stakeholders at both the global and the country levels. We work for children most in need in nearly 70 developing countries across the world. And so far, GPE has mobilized more than $7 billion for education, and our support reaches over 360 million children around the world. Equity and inclusion is at GPE's core. And in fact, they are the core pillars of our work. And while we've made significant progress in our working with our partner countries towards these goals, of course, we have a long way to go to reach SDG 4. Before the COVID-19 pandemic hit, an estimated 258 million children, adolescents, and youth, in fact, 17% of the world's total, were still not in school. Many of them have come from the most disadvantaged backgrounds. They are excluded from education because of the wider political, social, and economic factors like poverty, like early childhood marriage, fragility, violence, gender, disability, or in fact, the effects of poor health and nutrition. According to the 2020 Global Education Monitoring Report, in low and middle income countries, adolescents from the richest 20% of households are 3 times as likely as those from the poorest households to complete lower secondary school. So you can see that there are wide disparities. The poorest children are also more than twice as likely to be malnourished, which of course impedes their ability to learn. And children with disabilities are less likely to start school or transition to secondary school. There's a lack of understanding of their needs, there's a lack of trained teachers, there's a lack of sufficient support and resources, which often mean that children with disabilities lag behind their peers in gaining foundational learning. What has been the impact of COVID-19? COVID-19 has only worsened the situation, triggering in many ways an unprecedented learning crisis. As the world was locked down to slow the spread of COVID-19, 1.6 billion children were left out of school, and more than half of these lived in developing countries. Closing schools was necessary to save lives, but the longer that children are actually out of school, the higher the costs. School closures pose a monumental challenge for the equity and inclusion in education, exacerbating inequalities and discriminatory patterns that push children out of an education. In fact, we saw this same pattern with girls during the Ebola outbreak 5 years ago in West Africa. As schools closed, girls suffered more gender-based violence, early child marriage, teenage pregnancy, domestic violence, and child labor, and many were not able to return to school. In fact, if we see the same dropout rates today, from COVID, as we did see with the Ebola crisis, it is estimated that 10 million secondary school-age girls may not return to school at all after the pandemic. This is a report that was produced by the Malala Foundation just recently. And let's not forget the huge economic shocks of COVID-19. More than 70 million people and children will likely be pushed into extreme poverty this year alone, 70 million people. The global economy is projected to contract sharply by as much as 5.2% in 2020. This would represent the deepest recession since the Second World War. Think about that. Emerging market and developing economies alone are expected to shrink by 2.5%. This is a disaster. It means less government revenues and smaller budgets for education. It means plunging household incomes and much less money to pay for school fees and school needs. Parents, in fact, might have to choose which child to send to school. And vulnerable groups like girls and children with disabilities are often the ones that are chosen to stay out of school and be left behind. There's also going to be falling international aid for education, which means that we might lose crucial funding for support for education in low-income countries. And then finally, there will very much be an impact on earnings. Earnings will be lost. Every bit of time that children are out of school, losing the opportunity to learn, it creates a long-term loss in their earning potential over the course of their lives, which cannot be recovered. So even as we rightly focus on the health response, we must maintain and strengthen our investments in education, because education is critical to dealing with both the long-term and the short-term impacts of COVID-19. Let's just think about schools for a minute. Schools are the institution with the largest community reach in countries. Schools deliver important social protection like nutrition and food security. Schools disseminate health messaging and can support public health campaigns like hand washing, wearing masks, distributing vaccines. And in the long term, education contributes to social stability and provides better economic prospects for learners. This is the only sustainable way out of the economic crisis that we face. With schools closed, we risk sliding further back on equity and inclusion in education as more vulnerable children remain out of school. This makes continuing education ever more important, and it gives us an opportunity, in fact, to reimagine and reinvent education for the future. What is GPE doing about COVID? At GPE, we are deeply concerned about children at the margins of education systems who face exclusion, like refugees, children with special learning needs or disabilities, children from the poorest households and communities, and those living remotely. To respond to their needs, we're asking ourselves some very critical questions. Can we use distance learning techniques to deliver education to vulnerable children, including those who were out of school before the pandemic? Can we begin to ensure education is considered a key social protection tool and linked to broader social sector spending in health, WASH, nutrition, and safety, for example? So far, GPE is mobilized very rapidly, just over $500 million, $510 million to be precise, to support developing countries to respond to their immediate and long-term impacts of the pandemic on education. Now, GPE is the world's largest funder supporting education impacts of COVID-19 in developing countries. These grants include several components. The vast majority of the funding, $475 million, will take the form of direct country grants for countries who are impacted by COVID. And this money we expect to go to almost all of our country partners who apply for it. $25 million will support a set of shared approaches at what we call the global level. This money will be distributed to some of our global partners, and it will be used to research and try to pilot different approaches around distance learning. We also responded quickly as school closures swept across the globe in March And our first effort was just under $9 million going to all of our country partners to help them plan for their response in the pandemic and to plan how they would respond to it. The country grants, getting back to that, respond to the needs that have been identified by the countries, and you can find profiles of all of our country grants on our website, along with quite a bit of other data that sort of portrays the response that GPE has. Summarizing very briefly, the response falls into 4 main areas: learning continuity, especially for the most vulnerable, teacher support, safely reopening schools, and strengthening the resilience of education systems. About 1/3 of GPE's COVID response funds will go directly to supporting greater equity and inclusion. Let me give you some examples from the Asia Pacific region. First, regarding disadvantaged students. In Bhutan and Indonesia, GPE is supporting education continuity through learning materials, especially for the hard to reach in poor and rural communities. With regard to students with disabilities, in Cambodia, GPE is supporting sign language translation of video lessons. In Kyrgyzstan, GPE is supporting online remote learning platforms and content in local languages for all children, including children with disabilities. Many grants support girls through campaigns to prevent all forms of violence against girls, including early marriage, providing psychosocial support. And we're also supporting countries to develop their distance learning capabilities and build resilient education systems for the future. With GPE support, countries are investing in radio, television, and distributing print materials to keep children learning. So in closing, let us think about the future and think about building back better. The pandemic is making us face education challenges head on and urging us to act swiftly to overcome them. For GPE, this means transforming education systems to be truly inclusive so that nobody is left behind. In fact, GPE is developing a new strategic plan to guide our work over the next 5 years. This will be called GPE 2025. We are committed to supporting developing countries to transform, I'll say it again, to transform their education systems, to scale up innovation, to address equity and learning through building resilient education systems. We know that much more needs to be done. And later this year, with the launch of GPE's financing campaign, with new donor investments, we know that we can deliver quality education to even more children, especially the most vulnerable and marginalized. So keep an eye out for our replenishment campaign, which will be sometime mid next year, and it will enable us to have a renewed amount of funding to think further about these goals. And with our investment in COVID-19 education response, we will hope to be one step closer to a world where not even a pandemic can stand in the way of education for all children. So let me thank you once again for inviting me to join you from afar. I certainly wish I was with you there in person, and I wish you well with the rest of the conference. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Ms. Albright. Last but not least, I would like to invite Dr. Prasan to share EEF recent hands-on experience in fighting COVID-19 in Thailand and the fund's way forward.
For EEF, we have relatively more humble experiences compared with ECW and GPE. But drawing from the EEF's experience both before the COVID-19 and in the past few months, there were 5 important strategies, I think, that had supported equitable education for Thai children and youth, particularly the vulnerable ones. I would say that the first strategy is speed, trying to get ahead of the crisis and its consequences. In March 2020, some 4 months ago, before the pandemic reached its peak in Thailand, and when schools were still open, the EF board signaled to the management team to conduct a national survey in helping devise practical and timely solutions. The survey, which covered over 10,000 frontline teachers and school directors, addressed the critical impacts of COVID-19 on children and their families. The results show that if school shutdown was imminent, the most serious problem than schooling was hunger, particularly among the poorest families. In response, the EF board swiftly approved the emergency budgeting of over $16 million to provide 30-day food packages to over 700,000 extremely poor children across Thailand. We also raised over $500,000 of both in cash and in kind from donations to help the most vulnerable groups, including 30,000 children with severe acute malnutrition. I would say the second strategy is about social protection and equitable education. Before any schooling can start, a child should be healthy and ready to learn. No child should go without food or risk their life traveling to school. Equitable education, therefore, goes beyond just equitable learning opportunities, but also include food security, family security, travel safety, school security, and community security. These 5 securities of the social protection in education system will be the bedrocks of the equitable education for our children in this post-COVID society. I would say the third strategy is the agility, ready to adjust our business process and identify new partners to address knowledge and capacity gaps. As COVID-19 has disrupted every child, we must respond quickly to get ahead. Equitable education is no longer just about classroom-based face-to-face schooling. It is about social protection and other factors of child development. Schools must embrace the reality that education and good supporting systems are necessary to promote equitable education anywhere and at any time, whether it be at a student's home or school or online or at any place. The fourth strategy is independence. To successfully execute the 3 strategies above, we need certain amount of autonomy on the following key elements. One is data. The highest quality data is fundamental to any successful crisis management. Given time constraints and travel restrictions, innovative approach to data collection and analytics are instrumental to overcome the crisis. More importantly, data sharing among agencies is very crucial in promoting integrated policies and implementations at all levels. 2 would be resources. To address the emergency needs in a timely manner, we need to be able to independently mobilize sizable resources that match the scale of the problem. Not all resources need to come through us to reach the target population, but there should be a strategic alignment among different partners to effectively mobilize resources to tackle the crisis. Multiple approaches to resource allocation, either universal or targeting programs, should be employed to complement each other in this time of crisis. And 3 is decision-making, as equitable education must be above politics and bureaucracy. Under the Constitution of Thailand and the EF Act of 2018, drafted by the Independent Committee for Education Reform. The EEF board has certain independence to make tough and sometimes unconventional calls to address problems. This is crucial to realizing equitable education innovatively and effectively during this global pandemic. The fifth strategy, all for education. It takes a village to raise a child. COVID-19 has made this African wisdom even more relevant in the past few months. We no longer expect just schools alone to provide education for our children in light of the pandemic. Everyone in the society, private sector, families, NGOs, civil society must come together to help our children overcome this greatest challenge to humanity. These are some of our experiences and lessons during the first 2 years of our operation in Thailand. We are eager to learn and share experiences and knowledges with our international colleagues so that we can all move closer towards achieving equitable education goals and SDG 4 by 2030. This we hope to be the spirit of this international conference. Your Royal Highness and Mr. Chair, we hope our colleagues at international, regional, and national levels could benefit and enjoy the next 2 days of the first virtual international conference on equitable education, all for education. The other 4 plenaries and 15 parallel sessions will illustrate the potential game changers for equitable education in the last 10 years of SDG 4, including area-based education, innovative financing, and equity-based budgeting, as well as the roles of data and technology and public-private partnership. On behalf of our organizations, we hope you feel inspired by this agenda and be safe anywhere you are in the world.
Thank you so much, Dr. Prasan. I would like to invite all 3 speakers to make their closing remark before we conclude this plenary session. Ms. Jasmine, would you like to add anything at the end of this session?
Thank you very much. It's been a very interesting panel discussion. I have really been inspired by being in your presence today. I very much agree with what everyone has said, but I would like to go back to what Dr. Prasan mentioned so rightly, being the top priorities. We need access to data to measure and ensure that no one is left furthest behind, but also in order to measure learning so that we achieve learning outcomes. That's an area that needs improvement. We need to take affirmative action to make sure that those who are marginalized, the girls, the children with disabilities, the refugees, the displaced, are also included in the public school system. And we need to mobilize the resources. We calculate that 3.8 billion a year would be required if we were to deliver a quality education to those who have their education disrupted. So we are speaking about large amounts. And instead of investing in conflict and wars and military expenditures, invest in humanity. It's more cost effective and it's more humane. And finally, we need to make sure that education of the 21st century has the numerical skills, literacy, very important for children in conflict and crisis, but for all children, the social and emotional learning, technology. But what we need more than ever today, looking at how the world looks today, we need the ethical frameworks, the value system, the global coexistence, the sense of responsibility towards one another, and a sense of us being one humanity. And that starts early. It starts from the time the child is born and goes to school and grow up. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Ms. Sharif. So, Ms. Alice Albright, if you're ready, please share us the closing remark before we close this plenary session. Thank you.
Your Royal Highness, it's been a great pleasure to be here and a great honor. And I wish we were all together in person. Let me end perhaps by touching on a couple of things. I understand that my dear friend and colleague, Yasmin Sharif from ECW, Education Cannot Wait, has also spent some time with you. You know, we think in some ways that there's kind of a continuum between the development challenges associated with education and the humanitarian challenges associated with education. And what makes sense is to work kind of across a bridge, across that continuum. And getting a chance to work with ECW enables us to do so. Your second question was about overall about equity. And I'm delighted to hear the what you explained about Thailand's own domestic efforts around equity. I congratulate you for that. If GPE does not have all the answers by any means, but if you think there's anything in terms of advice or what have you that we can provide, we'd be delighted to be in touch with you informally about that. I think if you go back to the COVID pandemic, what it has laid bare is the huge degree of inequity in education. And we see it based on who's being left out of school. We are very worried that girls will permanently be left out of school because we saw that following the Ebola crisis. Clearly, one of the solutions to the pandemic is leaning further into distance learning at both high-tech, low-tech, no-tech, mid-tech. It's not just high-tech. And you know, we need to look at all, is distance learning, provided it's done well and teachers are involved and the curriculums are appropriate and so forth. But it has to be done so in a way that does not exacerbate the already equity divides. So that's a very tricky thing to get right, because when the pandemic is over with, which we all surely hope is soon, we can't wake up in a world where the inequities have actually gotten worse. So there's a really tricky policy and implementation pathway to navigate here. You mentioned in terms of some of the things that Thailand is contemplating, conditional cash transfers to reach out to the most remote areas. We would very much encourage that, because one of the overall impacts of the pandemic is going to be a macroeconomic impact. And so it's going to mean, for various reasons, whether or not it's budgetary sources from governments, international aid, remittances, jobs, household incomes, all of it is going to be negatively impacted, I'm afraid to say, for a while. And it's going to mean that children who are the most vulnerable from a poverty perspective are going to be in an even more disadvantaged position in terms of their ability to get back to school. So focusing on ways to get money to the most disadvantaged families to enable them to get their children back to school or access to the distance learning tools that are necessary, I think is a vital part of the response, so that we don't wind up coming out of the pandemic with greater inequity than we have now. And this is really at the heart of my organization's work. And to the extent that we can maybe provide a little bit of, we don't have all the answers. And I think the whole world is just trying to figure that out. So we really don't have all the answers. But if there's any bit of information that we could provide to Thailand, we would be happy to do so. And I wish you all the best of luck in your own efforts to try to contend with the crisis. Very best wishes and good luck.
Thank you very much, Ms. Albright. Dr. Prasan, would you like to add something?
Well, for me, I think it's a very valuable experience to have this opportunity to listen to Jasmine's presentation on ECW work and Alice on GPE. Certainly, although we share the common spirit, goals, But look like the environment, both of them are working in much more challenging than in our case EEF. Jasmine talked about war, violence, and so on. And in the case of GPE, also a broader perspective, broader variety of people to deal with. So this serves as a very great encouragement for the future work of the EEF. And as I mentioned in the very beginning, this is also very useful for us to have something to look up to as benchmark and as inspiration for us. Thank you very much for our two colleagues.
Thank you, Dr. Prasan. Your Royal Highness and Mr. Chair, we have come to the end of this plenary, and we can see that all three organizations, 2 global funds, 1 national fund, have shared the same spirit to the most vulnerable population of the world, the children of the world. Their commitment to equitable education at both international and national level is unparalleled. And I thank so much for the attention from all participants who join us from around the world today. This is our first international conference on equitable education, All for Education. In this remarkable situation around the world, the idea of All for Education cannot be compared to anything else. I wish you enjoy this first plenary session whenever you are. And I hope you find the rest of the conference equally inspiring and beneficial to your works on equitable education and to your course on the SDG 4 anywhere. Thank you, and please be safe and stay healthy. Goodbye for now. Thank you.